In this video, I'm going to show you how you can do cohort by cohort retention modeling. So this is basically an extension of what we had done when we were modeling retention for one cohort using the SPG model. This will be essentially the same thing, except we're going to do it across a whole bunch of different cohorts. So you have some data that's like this, and what this is showing is within each different acquisition cohort, here we're using quarterly cohorts, how many customers are alive at different points in time in the future. So for example, we acquired 50 customers, 53 customers, 60.4 in quarters 1, 2, and 4. Of those 60.4 that we acquired in quarter 4, you know, 45.1 were still alive as of period 6, and so on and so forth. And so what we want to do is fit SPG models that allow us to kind of capture what we would project that these cohorts are going to do into the future. And so we have basically our SPG model. This is going to be pretty much exactly the same thing as what we did earlier, except now I'm going to get the different proportions of the cohort that are alive for all of my different cohorts. So this is the retention curve associated with cohort 1. This is the retention curve associated with cohort 2. And we can just kind of keep this going. Cohort 3, cohort 4, cohort 5, 6, 7, and 8. And I'm just going to clean all this up over here. Now, there's kind of one thing that we are going to do here to allow us to be able to estimate a model with sufficient data. So what you can see is these cohorts over here, they're all being estimated off of their own cohorts data alone. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to estimate the parameters associated with cohort 4 using only cohort 4's data. But what will happen is, as we move to these younger cohorts, take for example cohort number 8. Cohort 8, we haven't observed a single retention data point. We just know that 82.92 customers were born in this period. And so we don't have the ability to estimate the model. So what we're going to do is we're going to there's no hard set rule for this, but what we're going to do is we're going to assume that cohorts that are sufficiently young all share the same parameters. And so we can see here is that cohort number 5, they're given parameters of 1 and 1, but cohort 6, 7, and 8, they're all just basically taking their parameters from cohort 5. So if I were to change this to a 2, then you can see all of these cohorts are going to adjust accordingly, and we can see that manifest in terms of the retention curves for those cohorts. So hopefully that makes sense. Now what we want to do is we want to be able to take these curves and then map it back to what we would have expected the C3 to be given the acquisition data that we saw. So if we go to cohort number 1, we know that we acquired 50 customers in that period. So the number of customers that we would expect to still be alive for that cohort in all the future periods is simply that same 50 that we started with multiplied by that point on the retention curve. And it's going to be the same thing with cohort number 2. So I'm going to take the 53 customers that we started with, multiply it by these values over here, where again, we're just picking that point off the retention curve and multiplying it by the number of customers that we had acquired into that cohort. Cohort number 3, I'm going to repeat the same drill. Same for cohort number 4. There we go. Cohort number 5. Cohort number 6. Cohort 7. And cohort number 8. Then the sum of the squared error, basically the way that we're going to estimate the parameters is by making the expected trajectory of customers alive over time and the actual number of cohorts that are alive over time as close as possible. So we want the orange line to be right on top of the blue line. That's essentially what we're going to do. So the way that we're going to do that is we're going to use this formula over here, sum x my squared, and we're going to use that to get the difference of the sum of the squared error between that and this. So it's kind of neat that this formula does that. We can do that for all of our various cohorts, but then again, what we're going to want to do for cohorts 5 through 8 is we're going to sum the error associated with those cohorts. So I'm just going to do this over here. The sum of the squared error. And this will be the SSE associated with periods 5 through 8. So then we can just use solver right up over here. And for starters, what we're going to do is we're going to estimate the parameters for cohort number 1. So I'm going to minimize the sum of the squared error for cohort 1 by changing cohort 1's parameters, where again we're going to operate under the constraint that the parameters have to be strictly greater than 0. So let's do that. Now let's just see how close those two lines are. So we saw before it didn't look so good. Now, oh yeah, look at that. We're looking great. So that's cohort number 1. Let's repeat it for cohort number 2. Change that as a function, change these parameters as a function of SSE2. Then change this as a function of that. Now we're going to minimize that by changing the cohort 4 parameters. And then finally, we're going to basically knock out cohorts 5 through 8 all in one fell swoop. So we're going to make this as small as possible by changing these parameters. There we go. So now one thing that we can do, just to see how well the fit is we can get the total number of expected cohorts that are expected customers that are alive at different points in time. We know that the number of customers that are alive at any point in time must be the sum of the cohorts, the sum of the customers who are alive at those different at that point in time across the different cohorts. So that's all that we're doing here. And so one other validation that we can check would be to see how well these two line up with each other, and we can see again they line up remarkably well. So whether we're looking at the cohort level or the aggregate across the cohorts, we're feeling pretty good about this. So hopefully this helps, and looking forward to tackling more of the retention modeling with you in the future.